My name is Gwen and welcome to Faraday Academy. In this video, I am going to give you an in-depth look at what Markdown is, why and where to use it, and go through everything from the basics of syntax all the way to libraries and some more advanced use cases. So to start, let me give you a quick 60-second overview of what Markdown is. Markdown is basically a simplified markup language that is used for formatting text. It gives you a way to write your text so that it can be compiled to HTML. Now, Markdown has been around since about 2004. This is actually the original announcement blog post where John Gruber introduced the Markdown language, which, like he says, was a text to HTML formatting tool that he called Markdown. So why would you use Markdown? Markdown is actually much easier to learn, use, and read than standard HTML. And it's evolved immensely in many different ways over the last 17 years. So now it's one of the most popular ways to format texts for blog posts, documentation, even in things like note-taking apps, of course Python notebooks. People also do some super cool things with Markdown, like creating tables and flowcharts, and even writing whole research papers and books in this Markdown syntax. Now, basically, I was researching why there are several different flavors of Markdown, and sometimes when you use it in different places, you'll notice a few minor differences. This is apparently because the original specification left many questions to be answered. So people basically came up with ways to fill in the gaps on their own. So when you look at sites like GitHub that supports Markdown and even has the default standard readme.md, in other words, Markdown files, they call it GitHub flavored Markdown, meaning it's Markdown plus a few additional features that GitHub gives you access to if you use Markdown files on their platform. Let me quickly list off some of the most popular apps that support writing with Markdown. For note-taking, you have Bear, Standard Notes, Joplin, and my current favorite, Obsidian, that support and use Markdown by default. For blogs, what I use for my own blog and FreeCodeCamp also uses for their blog is a platform called Ghost that also gives you an admin interface where you write the posts in Markdown as well. Now, when you go on forums or other blog sites, then you will notice that you can probably use Markdown to format your text there as well. For example, discourse forums like the FreeCodeCamp forum and many other development forums support Markdown. It's also very popular in the Jamstack world, where you can write any type of content from blogs to articles to just basic web pages in Markdown, and the plugins automatically handle converting it to HTML and rendering it on the page. As I mentioned before, if you use Python notebooks, which are pretty standard in a lot of colleges and coding programs now, you can use Markdown in any of those cells to write notes, format text, put headers, anything else. So let's dive into some of the basics now. I'm going to be working in this repository that I created in the past. It's basically a wiki for Django projects, and all it is right now is just one README file, which you can see from the extension is .md, so it's a Markdown file. And you can see it's nicely formatted text with headers, some regular paragraph text, bold text. Here's a list of links to different sections in this same article. Here's an unordered list with an external link to this library. And there's also some code blocks here. You can see they're properly highlighted and formatted. Some nested lists, more headers and subheaders, and you get the idea. So I have cloned this project locally already, and you can see that it looks much different in the actual raw code file. Over here, you can see there was a big header, which is Django Setup Wiki. This is just a paragraph, bold, and a list. and you can kind of get an idea of how it's formatted over here. Now I'm going to create a new file and start from scratch to show just some of these basic features of Markdown first. So I want to add a section here, and I want to talk about how to set up GraphQL projects in Django. So I'll call it graphql.md. And now that I've created this file, I can write any type of Markdown in here. And any code editor like VS Code, what I'm currently using, will recognize this as Markdown text. So let me write my first line of Markdown and then we can preview it. So I'm going to put one hashtag here and say Django GraphQL, and I'll save that. Now VS Code actually lets me take a look at this in preview mode. If I right click and say open preview, so I'm going to click on open preview, and now you can see this is how it would actually display the text if I was writing it in a Markdown supported environment like GitHub. Basically, if I put a hashtag and a space, this renders to an H1 in HTML. If I put two hashtags, this is an H2. You can see it got smaller. 3 hashtags is an H3. 4, H4, and so on. You can see in the browser, I'm at the top here of the previous page I showed you, so the README. If I right click and inspect element, I can see an H1 is rendered here, which in the README corresponds to this line of text at the top, which starts with a hashtag. Now it does have to be hashtag and then a space, or else it's not going to register as a heading. So you can see now it's just plain text. Now a line of plain text does automatically render as its own paragraph. So if you look back in the README file, there's instructions for setting up Django projects. If you see in my HTML, that is a paragraph tag, even though there are no special symbols or elements or anything around this. Now let's look at different styles. Let me add another row of text here. First, let me fix this header, and I'll say instructions for setting up GraphQL in a Django project. Now I'm going to make another table of contents, and I want this text to be bold. So I'm going to use 2 stars or the asterisk symbol and say table of contents. And you can see when I add the closing 2 asterisks, my syntax highlighting came on. So if I save this and preview it, you can see that the table of contents is bold text, and this is just regular text. Now along the same lines, if this was just 1 asterisk, see now it turns purple, and this displays as italic text. If I wanted to strike through an element, then I can add 2 tilde symbols to the beginning and end of whatever text that I want to strike through. And you can see there is a line through this text here. That's really useful for lists and also for editing contents. Now, these things don't have to be used in isolation. So for example, if I had bold text, I could also have italic text in the middle, and you can see it's bold and italic. Now for the table of contents, just like I have on this page here, I'm going to create an ordered list. Now for an ordered list or a numbered list, I can just type in the number followed by a period, and then when I hit the space bar, you can see the color change slightly on the 1. So you can see Markdown is now recognizing this as a list. Let me just add a few elements here. And you can see this is a pretty normal looking list. Now there will be some formatting, such as indentation, added depending on what application you are writing your Markdown in. You can also nest these list items. So if I wanted to nest an item, let's say inside of graphene, and go to my preview, you can see that it is nicely indented inside of the parent list item. I'm going to get rid of that line. Now, one thing that often happens when you are creating long lists of things is that you inevitably have to switch around items. Let's say I wanted to move item number 2 to before item 1. So I just copy pasted it, but now I have to update this number, and then I have to update all following numbers as well so that they are correctly numbered. And now if I want to move that back, which I do, now I have to do the same thing again. Now, one way that most platforms support that allows you to avoid this is by using the number 1 for every element in the list. So I would just say 111, and then Markdown basically handles numbering them based on their order. So we can see this in the preview. It still says 1, 2, 3, and everything is in the correct order, even though we're just using 111. That is a really handy kind of extra feature of Markdown that is pretty widely supported. Now, let me make a section for the first item here. I'm going to make a subheader, so an H2, and inside of here, I'm going to add a code block. Now, I could do this two ways. I can use an inline code block or a multi-line code block, and I'll show both of them. So inline, I could say install graphene, one more L, and I can use a backtick here, and then I can say something like pip install Django graphene, and then close it with a backtick. And you can see my highlighting changed there. And if I go to my preview, you can see that it stands out as formatted text. Now, if I want to do a multi-line code block, let me just add another header here. So creating schemas, I can use 3 backticks and then paste my code in here and then close it with another 3 backticks at the end. Now if I go to preview here, you can see this definitely stands out as a code block. Keeps all its formatting and it does look pretty nice. However, there's one more thing that I can do here, and that is actually tell Markdown which language of code I am putting inside this code block. So I can use a shortcut here like JS or Python, PY for Python, which this code is Python, so I'm going to leave that. Now if I go to my preview, you can see it's even properly highlighted now. And most interfaces will let you highlight your code blocks as well by defining what language you're putting in the code block. Now, let's say I want to add a separator somewhere in here. Let's say right here, after instructions and before the table of contents, I want to have some kind of horizontal line. So here, I can just add 3 dashes. Let's go to my preview, and you can see this whole gray horizontal line above the table of contents here. That is from the 3 dashes. Now you might notice there is this other thinner line up here, and many platforms underneath an H1 tag, so a main header, will add some kind of thin horizontal line for you just to provide some natural separation for the text. But you can also add yours manually, as I just showed you here. Now let's look at some block quotes here. Let me actually add a horizontal row here. And now let's look at block quotes. This is also very easy to do. You basically use a right angle bracket followed by a space, and it's a block quote. So if I wanted to quote Bob Ross, for example, I just pasted in a Bob Ross quote, Now if I go to preview, you can see it has a special quote syntax. Now if I want to also include the name of the person who said this, there doesn't seem to be an official standard way to do that. So a lot of people will just use something like a citation tag. By the way, because 2 lines in a row, line 55 and 56, have the right angle bracket, these are considered to be in the same block quote because they aren't separated by empty lines. So here I'm just going to put a dash, and then I will include a little bit of HTML, a site tag, and then I can say Bob Ross. So I am going to use a double dash, and it shows that it's by Bob Ross. I could put another blank line to separate these two. So now you can see Bob Ross, it put it on the next line. Now some people say that you should have the name outside of the block quote. So do something like this, and I could even make this italic and preview it, and I could do something like this. Now, just like mixing bold and italic and those sorts of things, you can also nest anything inside of a block quote. So you can have bold text, you can have lists, links, anything. You can even nest block quotes inside of block quotes. So let me do that real quick. I'm going to use another Bob Ross quote. And I needed to have one line separating the attribution, so let me add that in so it doesn't think it's being part of the block quote here. Now if I separate that, you can see I have this main block quote, and then I also have a nested block quote that's indented. This is a really useful feature for forums and for places like the GitHub issues section where you're quoting multiple people. Now, speaking of different types of lists, I'm going to add another section here with an unordered list. Let me scroll up, and right under here I'm going to add another subheading and just add why GraphQL. Now here there's no particular order to the reasons why someone might use GraphQL, so I'm going to make it an unordered list. Now there are several different ways of writing unordered lists. You can use an asterisk, but I recommend using a dash, which is more widely supported, and places like Obsidian, which is my current note-taking app, if I use an asterisk, it thinks I want to make italic or bold text, and it's a little bit of a pain. So it's just easier to use one dash here, even though some platforms like GitHub will support using asterisks for lists. So I could say something like get only the data that you want, easier to manage endpoints. Let's see how this looks. And here you can see the unordered list. Pretty much the exact same thing as the ordered list. And let me add this to the beginning of my table of contents. See how easy it is using ones here. I just add it to the beginning and my list is correct. Now in my README over here, all of these items in my table of contents are links. You can see here, like if I click on this link, it takes me to this section of the project. Now this is something that a lot of platforms support, and that is automatically generating IDs for all headers in your whole document based off of the text in the header. So if I right click off of this header, and usually it does this for H1 and H2 headers, you can see the H2 here, and there's actually this nested element, which might be hard to see, but it's this little link tag that shows up to the left of the header when you hover over it. And basically you can see this is a custom generated ID, user-content-general-setup, and so on, of the whole header. GitHub and many other platforms do this automatically for you. So what this means is, so if I have an H2 tag like graphene installation, I can create a link here with the link text, the text that's going to show up on the screen, inside of square brackets. And then right next to that, I'm going to put parentheses. And inside of the parentheses, I'm going to say that this links to an ID. So I'll start it with a hashtag, and I'm going to say graphene-installation. It's all converted to lowercase. So basically it's the exact same thing as the title here, but converted to lowercase, and any spaces are hyphens. So let me preview that. And I can see now this is a link, and if I click on it, it takes me to the graphene installation section. And I can do that for all the rest of the sections here. So why GraphQL? I can wrap that in square brackets and put parentheses, and here there's punctuation. There's a question mark in the title, but I'm just going to leave that off. So I'll do y-GraphQL, and then I can go to my preview, y-GraphQL, and it takes me to y-GraphQL. So in general, you want to leave punctuation, any type of punctuation you have in a title here. That won't be included when the ID is generated. But if you ever have a question on the exact ID that's being generated, again, you can just right click on one of these titles. So inspect, and then I can see whatever ID is being generated here. So what if we want external links, not just internal to different areas of our document? We can basically do the same thing. Let me add a paragraph up here. I'm going to get rid of this horizontal row. And let me just add square braces, and I'll put some link text inside. Let's say we want to link to the graphene documentation, which is the Django GraphQL library. And I have the link already copied here, so I'm just going to paste it. So now basically, if I go to my preview document, I can see here's a link, graphene documentation. If I click on it, VS Code is asking me if I want to go to this external website. I'm going to say, go ahead and open. And it takes me to the documentation here. So what about images? I just went and pasted this image here, manage poll. This is just a mock-up from an application that I'm building on my live streams. But I basically want to try to embed that inside of my Markdown file here. So let me come to the bottom here. And this basically uses the same syntax as creating a link, except you start with a bang or the exclamation point there. I'll just give it some text in here. I'll call it poll mockup. Now the text inside of the square brackets for an image, that's going to be your alt text for that image. And now inside parentheses are the path to that image. So I'm going to say, this is actually kind of a strange image name because there are spaces in it. So I'm just quickly put an underscore and say poll page. Let me come back here and I'm going to say poll underscore page.png. I need to add the dot there so it's in the same directory, and now my image shows up here. Now what if I want to create a link on this image, in other words turn the whole image into a link itself? I can do that actually by wrapping the whole image inside of another set of square brackets, just like I would any other piece of text. And you'll notice this across all of Markdown, that you can nest and kind of mix and match wherever you want. So I'm just going to grab the same link that I used earlier for the graphene documentation and paste it in there. Now if I go to my preview, you can see I have a different cursor over the image, and now if I click on it, it comes up with this same do you want to go to an external link dialog box. I'm just going to hit cancel. Now there are a few other things, and one thing you will find is that generally in Markdown you can use HTML tags as well. So if I had some text here and I wanted to put it on multiple lines, for example, a common thing would be to use a BR or a line break tag, and then I could put some more text And then if I go to preview, I can see it is on 2 lines. I could do this with anything. I could use HTML image tags, paragraph tags, any kind of HTML tag I could put inside of my Markdown. Sometimes for more advanced features, you might want to embed HTML tags inside of Markdown. A lot of platforms do support this, some might not, but it might be a good option for you. Now, one more thing that I do a lot at the bottom of my readmes, and is just something common you might use in Markdown in general, is to create task lists. So let's say I had something like a roadmap here. I'll put that as an H2 tag. And then here I can actually create a list of tasks that I can check off. And what I do is I start it by using a dash space just like I would any other list, but then I have square brackets and I put a space in the middle of them. And I can say task 1 and then task 2, etc. And if I look at the preview, so it seems like actually VS Code doesn't support this, but the basic syntax would be if an item is checked off, you would put an X in the middle, otherwise you would leave a space in the middle. Here you can see that it works, but it's definitely not formatted. So let's take a look at this task list in another interface. And you can see I pushed my Markdown file up to GitHub. I'm going to click on it, and if I scroll to the bottom, I can see these actually render as actual checkboxes. So in most interfaces, such as my note-taking applications and GitHub flavored Markdown, these types of checkboxes, the square brackets with or without an X in the middle, they will render as checked or unchecked checkboxes. Those are all the features for the very basics of Markdown. Now let's look at some more intermediate features. Let's talk about tables next. I'm going to come to the end of my graphql.md file and just get rid of all this extra temporary content. Now, tables can get pretty complex, so I'm just going to show you how to create a simple table because this is generally what you will need. Let's say we want to make a state diagram, or I guess a state table. I'm going to put name here, and then I'll just give it another space and another pipe symbol. And then I'm going to say current state and next state. These terms don't mean anything for Markdown, of course. This is just an example that's on the top of my head right now, so I decided to use it. On the next row, this is where my dividers are going to be. And a divider is basically a bunch of dashes, optionally prepended or appended with a colon. And what the colon means is that is where the text will align. So if you have a colon at the beginning to the left of the dashes here, that means your text will be left aligned to the right. That means your text will be right aligned. And if it's on both ends, then it will center your text inside of the cells. So I'm going to keep it left aligned. Usually I'll put a standard number of dashes here. I'll put 6 and 6, space, and then a pipe, and then let me go ahead and create a cell here. I'm going to say green. Let's say light color. Let's say this is a stoplight. So light color, if the light is green, then the current state will be green and the future state will be yellow. Let me save that. If I go to preview, you can see I kind of have a table here. Now tables will look different on every interface. So if you're displaying a table on GitHub versus a Python notebook versus here in VS Code, the table is always going to look a little bit different, but it's pretty much the same idea with column headers and then content for each cell. So here I could also do a second one here. So if I do yellow, I'll just leave it like this. So I'll do yellow and then red. And you can see I don't need to explicitly put extra dividers between every column, it will automatically give dividers. Usually there are vertical dividers as well, but I guess in VS Code they're just implied here because it creates a space separation between the next column. One of the coolest things that I have found in Markdown is actually being able to collapse and hide text using a collapsible element. Now this is another case where you use HTML in the Markdown. So I can actually use something called details, and inside of this details tag, I'm going to also use a summary tag. And inside the summary, this is going to be something like a section header, and then inside details, I'm going to put some more text that will be hidden or optionally hidden. I'm going to say section body text. And now I'll close the details tag. Let's take a look at this over in our preview. So here you can see all we see is the section header text, but you can see I clicked on it and now the section body text displays. I can fold it and I can show it. So basically the only text that's shown is section header, whatever's inside of the summary tag, and then you can put as many things as you want inside of the details tag. Anything outside of the summary tag though will be optionally hidden. And you can have lots of other stuff here. Like I could have a list, and all of this text would be hidden inside of here. Yeah, so if I don't indent the list, it actually displays properly in Markdown. One other interesting element that can be useful is footnotes. I'm just going to create a header here to create some kind of separation. And here I can just type out a sentence and create a footnote by using square brackets, and then I basically need to use a caret inside and then whatever text or number I want to reference that footnote. I think it's usually a number, but you can also put something like text here. I'm just going to use a number, and then let me make another header. Let's say I have some kind of footer at the bottom of the page, and then I basically make an exact replica of what I used for my footnote here. So I'll use square brackets, caret, and 1. And now this should automatically link. Now, again, this is one of those features that isn't in the default Markdown syntax, so it might not work on every platform. Such as VS Code, it doesn't recognize this syntax. It's what's called extended syntax. Now, I pushed this to GitHub as well, and if I scroll down, you can see that actually GitHub doesn't support the footnotes feature either, but this is supported in many note-taking programs, so it's something good to know about. For example, it works really well in Obsidian, which I use for all my notes and many other things. Those are all the features that I am going to demo for Markdown. Now, I do want to go over some of the other cool things that you can do with Markdown. For example, Markdown has emoji support, so you can paste emojis inside of your Markdown files. It also supports typesetting with LaTeX if you want to embed formulas and things like that inside of your Markdown files. If you don't know, LaTeX is another text coding language where you're basically creating research papers and PDFs. There are also a plethora of plugins in the Markdown ecosystem. For example, Mermaid.js, which is basically Markdown inspired text definitions, and you can create these in programs like Obsidian, and then directly from your Markdown files you will be able to see flowcharts and things like this. If you want to know more information about Mermaid, I actually learned Mermaid from one of my friends, a fellow YouTuber, Brian Jenks, so I'm going to link that video for you to go watch if you want. Now, there are other markup languages, like Python uses RST, which is restructured text, and you see a lot of Python projects use RST files, which is pretty similar to Markdown, but mostly used in the Python community, and sometimes documentation can be auto-generated into those files. There's also MediaWiki. Basically, Wikipedia made its own markup language. I think they created it around 2003 for use on their platform. So they also have something similar to Markdown, but not exactly the same. But if you learn Markdown, the concepts will be similar to many other types of markup. One other really cool use case for Markdown is actually writing books. And I found quite a few examples of this online. There are actually people who write and format entire books by just using Markdown. And I almost wish I had known about that before I first started writing my book in another editor. And this is even popular enough that there are tools created for people writing their books in Markdown. That's it for this video. I am going to finish updating my documentation here, so feel free to take a look at this repository. I'll link it in the description below. Let me know if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback. I really encourage you to spend at least an hour or so trying to learn Markdown. It's pretty simple to pick up, and it's just used in so many different places now that anything you learn will definitely not go unused. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.